Welcome everyone. At the outset, I take this opportunity to welcome all the learners of PGJMC and MAJMC of School of Journalism and New Media Studies and all the other guests who very fondly join us whenever we have such Facebook Live sessions. So today our topic of discussion would be media ownership. We all know that media is something which is very flamboyant, which is very important to the existence of any society, more so in today's world, which is greatly technology directed. In such times, one who owns the media obviously becomes more important than the others in a social setup. So today we will talk of all the aspects of media ownership, particularly in context of India and how it has been taken up so far. So in this session, we will discuss the various topics like initiators of change and how did media ownership start changing. Then the effects of globalization. We all understand that globalization came and it has still been having some very important effects. We'll discuss that. And then we will go on to the factors leading to the change in ownership and how ownership has become more important due to these factors. Then Indian media after deregulation. Once deregulation and privatization happened, how was Indian media impacted by it? Also, we will discuss the types of media ownership that is in existence today in India and the trends in media ownership and what are the recent changes that have come so far. And in the end, we would discuss the ethical issues which are connected with ownership patterns of mass media. So here we begin. First, the basics. We all need to understand how business to business and business to customer businesses are different from each other. When I say B2B, what is B2B? Business to business. Say for example, somebody produces microchip. It is then sold to a mobile making company and then the product finally reaches the customer. So this is a business to business transaction. Alternately, business to customer transaction is where a company directly produces those goods and services which are then sold off to the customers. Why are we discussing this? It is because media in its own, as an own entity, is also a B2B business. So it is something that will organize advertisements, publicity, promotion, so as other goods and services can be sold. So those are the basics that we need to clear first so that we go on to the ownership patterns. Then media ownership deals with basic questions like who owns and who controls. So who is it that owns the media and who is it that is controlling the media and a certain section of it. Then what it is, the kind of content which is produced, how it is being produced and what is the kind of audience the media production unit is looking at. So it is very important to understand who our target audience are, who is the potential target audience and how can we expand our business based on our product, which in this case is the content. So let us now discuss what are the initiators of change. When we talk about the initiators of change, the first and foremost thing that comes to everybody's mind is globalization. So what is local and what is global? Globalization basically is the interdependence of world economies on each other. The culture, the population, everything, and as well as the international trade. This trade comprises of goods and services, the investment flow that comes into the businesses, the technology, people, and most importantly in today's world, the information. So all this together, when comprises the crossing of transnational boundaries, it is called globalization. The second important initiator of change was technological advancement. Technology of late has been advancing by leaps and bounds, and the way it was 20 years back, it isn't the case today. So the technological advancement has also initiated change in a phased manner, because slowly we have observed in various businesses as well as media, transacting with people, communicating with people, getting your point of view across to people has become much easier. because there is a plethora of technologies, plethora of platforms that are available to us as media producers as well as media audiences. The third important factor, which is the initiator of change, is the concentration of product and marketing. So once we understood that technology can help us, and once the deregulation happened through globalization, there was greater concentration, the consolidation of the production and marketing of the media products, the content of various kinds. It could be journalism, it could be a movie, it could be songs, it could be books, it could be anything that you think of. So the concentration of production and marketing was another important initiator of change, which led us to believe a different scenario from what existed. And then the capacity for global reach of communications throughout the world. Since ICT, information and communication technologies, had advanced so much, the capacity to reach out to a global audience increased multifariously. So those were the few initiators of change. Now let us see how globalization affects media ownership. The first and most important is that there are no more traditional boundaries of media markets. So earlier there were boundaries. You could broadcast a TV program or a radio program only up to a certain extent, because that is basically the wavelength that you could meet. So now there are no traditional boundaries. You can very well see programs that are broadcasted abroad in other countries, in India at various time zones, as well as Indian programs can be viewed abroad. And of course, there is rapid expansion of a free market structure. A liberalized economy is what we are talking of. When we say a free market structure, it is open to all. It is free for all. So whoever negotiates best, whoever offers the product in the minimum possible price is the one who wins. So rapid expansion took place as a result of globalization, and the free market structure came into a form. Then national markets are not protected for local producers. For a long time we had seen in China, which of course later on it opened its economy to the other countries as well. And before we opened our doors to the private companies of foreign countries, the national markets were protecting the local producers. So the local businessmen, the local businesses were protected against foreign businesses. So what the Prime Minister usually talks about, the ease of doing business, was much more for the local businessman as compared to those from abroad. But now with globalization, things have changed. So they are not protecting the local businessman anymore, and everybody has an equal opportunity. And in such a scenario, obviously the one who has greater resources and better resources at hand will win the war. Then we talk about a borderless, competitive, international economy. Borderless and competitive because since we are not confined by national boundaries anymore, we are talking of a world which is highly competitive in nature. Competitive in terms of pricing, in terms of strategy, in terms of the product offered, in terms of the servicing of the product and the value addition that most customers across the world look for. So it is competitive, it is borderless, and it is an international economy. You would see these days in times of COVID-19, when the market economy of one country went down, be it Europe, be it the Americas, the global economies were affected because everything is intertwined. We are no more islands in ourselves. The entire economic structure across the world is dependent and interdependent on each other. New business and corporate strategies arose from it because the rules of the game have changed. And since the rules have changed, we do require new business concepts. We do require new strategies with which we could proceed in a new global arena of business which needs to be won over. And then convergence of technology between media and other industries. When we say convergence, just to explain this concept simply to the students, convergence means when you bring together many technologies into one. And mobile is a very good example. It is a computer, it is a phone, it is much more than just one machine. So this is called convergence of technology, and this convergence has been taking place at a large pace and at a heavy pace between media industries as well as other industries. So it could be media and telecom, it could be media and computing, it could be computing and telecom, so on and so forth. Then various kinds obviously have a greater hold, a greater control over the market. So there is concentrated media ownership. Media ownership has become concentrated in the hands of a few. You would see that there are a few families in media in India who would own multiple avenues and arenas of media. So the concentrated media ownership has grown over time. Also, there is a greater trend of cross-media ownership. If you own a newspaper, you are more likely to go and open a news channel as well. Or if you're owning a news channel or a newspaper, you would also like to open an educational institution where you can train children or students on with hands-on skills and training. Then there is a greater growth of conglomerates. When I say conglomerates are, it's the rise of those businesses which, other than being in their major segment, also have the ownership in media businesses. So say for example, somebody has a business of telecommunications, also buys certain number of shares in a television channel. That is called a conglomerate. So other than owning other businesses, when you also start owning a media business, you are a business conglomerate. Then this was about globalization. Now let us discuss what are the factors that lead to change in ownership patterns. Those were the factors that greatly affected globalization, and they were a resultant, an outcome of what globalization gave us in terms of our business environment. Now when we are talking about the factors that lead to change in ownership, the first thing to consider is the changes in global political economy. When I say global political economy, all politics has economics in it and all economics has politics in it. So the countries of the world, there is a certain economy that they try to keep resilient, and there is a certain politics that goes around it. It could be the politics of war, it could be the politics of poverty and the economics of poverty, so on and so forth. So when we talk about the changes in the global political economy, we talk of foreign direct investment, we talk of joint ventures, and we talk of content export. What do we mean by content export? Content export is when any kind of content which is getting produced for, say for example, American audience is also viewed, liked, and it's welcomed in India. So the same product comes to India. This is exporting of content. Foreign direct investment is when a foreign company buys certain shares or is ready to invest in an Indian concern. It obviously brings about a change in the geopolitical economic scenario of the world. And then there are joint ventures whereby two people who have the capability and the capacity to invest come together and begin with something new or something which is already existing as a business unit. So those were the changes in global political economy. The second is the effect of rise of ICT. ICT is such a potent factor. It will be discussed over and over again, not only in this presentation, but also whenever we will talk about the polity, the economy, the political economic relationships of countries. Media ownership, media control, this is something which will affect all aspects of these subjects, because ICT, the way it has progressed and the way it has proliferated all across the social fabric, it is very important to study. You cannot negate it. So deregulation and privatization were a byproduct, I would say, of the rise of ICT, because so far there were a few rules with which everybody would play. But now there were no regulations, since there were countries, different countries and economies coming across and participating in our economy, and ours going and participating in theirs. So also privatization. Nothing was going as per only the government laws and rules. So we were opening our doors to private players who could be better or equal performers. Then fragmentation of media markets. This became an important context because When we talk about media markets, the audience is the same. You are trying to sell something through an advertisement. You are trying to convince the same audience to buy certain products through some event. You are trying to, propel forward some product or some service by means of news, by means of films that you make on them. So ideally, the media market got fragmented into smaller segments, whereby every media was trying and competing for the same audience pie. And then of course the changing capital markets. There was greater deregulation, there was more mergers and acquisitions of companies. This kept changing the market capital all the time. So the scenario and the way it was depicted economically kept changing time and again. There could be a time when the economic trades and ties and other such soft relations and things like that were stronger between two countries, and the equations might change when one country would try to build similar relationships with another country. So it may or may not be liked by the former players. So there were changing capital markets all the time. Any country who was in a position to invest was investing its monies into and media is a more softer target, I would say, because it allows you to change an opinion. It allows you to form an opinion. It allows you to think the way the controller of that media would want the audience to think. So obviously, greater deregulation and greater mergers and acquisitions, greater investments in such projects of media were happening on a large scale. Then all of it led to growth. One, mergers and acquisitions obviously lead to growth. When two companies merge together, the share market rises up and they become stronger in terms of growth. And for the first time in India, we would see that stock options were offered as a part of the executive compensations. So when you talk about the multinational concerns, media concerns that people are employed with, like Facebook and Google, they do get stocks and shares of the company when they join, and this keeps rising with the number of years that you spend with that company. So stock options became a good part of the executive compensation for people. And then there was of course an overseas expansion. We all know Google is expanding into, it began from the US and where all it has expanded into other than China. Also for Facebook, so also for Amazon. So there was greater business interest in this, and there was, obviously it was a very lucrative offer for everybody who was a part of such an expansion. And then this led to increased competition, declining market share and rising costs. These were the after effects of what was happening, the new media environment, the new media marketing business environment that countries became a part of. So there was increased competition. The market share of various companies would go down because considerably we were looking at bigger shares, whereby big international players, as a result of deregulation and privatization, were coming onto our soil and competing with us. And of course, there were rising costs. On one hand, there could be a player who in lesser cost would be able to provide a better value to the customer as compared to a local player. And that is how, the imbalance arises. Now let us look at the ownership patterns in different nations. Here I'm not going to dissect this whole topic country-wise or continent-wise. I will just give you a broad outlook of how this is going to be. Like rich countries, when we talk of rich countries, the levels of state ownership is low here. So the government control is less here. Why? Because when the countries are rich, there are greater number of private players. And obviously there is multiplicity of opinion that would be presented in terms of the content. And these players are strong enough to find some financial backing, find some investments and continue as against the government players of that country. So rich countries will always see lower levels of state ownership. As compared to this, autocratic countries where you have one party rule or a single person ruling, the level will be very high because this person will be able to control, would like to control media so that things are smooth according to their policies and according to the way they want to run the country. Then we have poor countries where there is a greater level of one is the poor countries and the other is the autocratic countries. So poor countries also will see greater level of state ownership, greater control, because the resources are short. Whatever resources are there are concentrated in the hands of the government, so they can they can create greater opportunities of controlling the media in such countries. Also, when we talk about democratic countries, we have discussed in our previous sessions libertarian media system, a free-for-all media system. So where there is democracy, there is plurality of opinion. When I say plurality of opinion, you try and fit everybody's opinion into the subject of discussion. So the level of control by the state or by the government is low. And that is how a democracy flourishes, especially when we talk in terms of media. Then let us discuss Indian media post deregulation. Deregulation happened, the economies opened up, we were happy to accommodate private players from other countries. And what happened after that? One, there was hyper growth of market. So we would see media companies growing hyper locally. They were not just on local levels anymore. There were other countries and other companies, media companies as well as non-media companies, that were investing into the media companies of India, due to which the share market would rise, due to which there would be a more than average growth in the market. That is what we call a hyper growth. Then there was privatization of public services. We know that there is a government telecom service that is provided, which prevents us from having a very smooth facility in itself. But on the other hand, we have certain private players that also produce good amount of good amount of service, in a way that they are able to bring up a scenario where the audiences are content with what they are provided with. So the privatization of public services is one thing that happened post deregulation. Global cultural homogenization was another factor. When I say cultural homogenization, so far we were allowing different cultures to flourish and present themselves through regional media, through local media, through, let us say, national media also. But now we were open to the times where global cultures were accepted and they were dominant. So global cultural homogenization started taking place. We are trying to straitjacket value systems of people. And when we are trying to straitjacket value systems, we are also getting into the fact that homogenization will prevent any kind of multiplicity of thought and multiplicity of opinion. But since it suits the business players, this is how it is happening. Then of course, consumerism. Consumerism is another factor that was pushed on a large scale by media companies, because consumerism would lead to, one is the need and one is the want. So through consumerism, media could push to us the products which were not really needed by the people. But at the same time, the economy started doing well and the purchasing power of people was going up. And of course, consumerism started, having roots. And then there was greater interconnectedness of national economies, that we very well know. The corporate deregulation took place. There was greater corporatization of media. Media was not corporate to the extent to which it is now. So the corporate deregulation happened for media. And then there were traditional nation states that were displaced. The traditional concept of a certain part of the country, a certain culture, value systems, demography and psychographics of people, they were being disposed and displaced slowly. So on the whole, these were the basic factors that affected India and Indian media after deregulation happened. Next, we discuss the types of media ownership. This is the kind of media ownership that exists, that is prevalent even today. And say for example, when we say chain ownership, so there is a say for example, a newspaper organization that owns multiple newspapers. You will see a Times of India also owning a Navbharat Times and some other newspaper. So there are various other newspapers. There's a chain of newspapers whose ownership Bennett and Coleman may have. Cross-media ownership is when you already are owning a newspaper, you have a media and you get into another media business. Say for example, while also having a newspaper, you get onto a radio channel or a TV channel. So this is called cross-media ownership. Then conglomerate ownership. The idea of conglomerate is, as I explained earlier, when you own certain business verticals and alongside you also own a media business. So conglomerate ownership also grew because everybody could see how lucrative the media business could be and how well it could support the various other businesses. So this has been an ethical question that has been discussed for a long time now. But people don't pay much attention these days since everything is global and there are various companies and we are not even sure who is the concern which is owning a certain media group and how much percentage of shares is owned by whom. So in such kind of a scenario, conglomerate ownership was more prevalent and was more beneficial to the owners of media, to the owners of those businesses. Now we talk of vertical integration. Vertical integration is when you try to own something which is going to affect the media business which you are directly owning or of which you are directly a part. Say for example, newspapers. If you run a newspaper and you decide to buy a few acres of land to grow trees so that you can produce your own pulp and you can produce your own newsprint. Earlier, there were a few restrictions as to how much newsprint which organization can buy, and there would also be discounts given to smaller newspapers and smaller publications because they would not be in a position to pay so much because newsprint is a costly commodity, it is highly expensive. So vertical integration is another scene altogether, is something which is totally in contrast. You decide to own certain number of acres of land and you grow your own trees in order to extract pulp and make your own newsprint. So this is vertical integration. So these are the various kinds of media ownership that are existent, prevalent in the media scenario today. And now let us discuss what are the trends of media ownership. These trends have had their onus on the society, on the polity, on the culture, the cultural fabric at large. But nevertheless, these are the prevalent trends and you should be aware about them. So let us first discuss the emerging trends. Like all companies, since media companies are all very lucrative, mergers and acquisitions and strategic deals and alliances keep taking place not only with the allies but with the rivals as well. So when there are two opposing groups who are at war with each other as far as business is concerned, if they find a kind of audience segment, a niche audience segment where the two can propel their energies together, they can synergize and push a product, they would do it. So there are no permanent friends or foes in business. Then we talk about the convergence of technology. Convergence, like I said, because of ICT, convergence has been the in thing. The more affordable it can be, the smaller it can be, and more number of functions it can operate on, the better it gets. So media, telecommunication and computing. These were the three sectors which merged together to come up with various kinds of products which could be something like a Chromecast, which could be a caravan, which could be anything, any kind of product which would lead you to multifarious usage of the same media in multiple ways. And then of course the producers and distributors of content also decided to converge. So when, say for example, a media distributing agency also decides to have their own media agencies that would produce the content, obviously their control over the media environment as far as product is concerned, as well as the media marketing would improve, would be stronger. So convergence of producers and distributors of content kept taking place. Say for example, Netflix is a good example. All such video demands, video on demand kind of services which are coming into picture these days, they are all good examples of this. Then we talk of consolidation. Consolidation happens due to the rise of conglomerates. How much market share do you have in which sort of a business, in which kind of an economy, makes all the difference. That will tell you about your ability to bleed. What do I mean by the ability to bleed? The ability to bleed is your capacity to pour in money into advertising, into promotions, into something, or price wars for that matter. We will discuss price wars later. As to all those strategies which would help you weaken the opponent. So consolidation was important as far as businesses are concerned. Competition turned both intermedia as well as intramedia. When I am talking about intermedia competition, it could be one daily competing with another daily. But when I talk of intramedia competition, there can be a monopolistic market, there can be the owner of one media which also has cross media, and then all the media together are competing against each other, and this is called intramedia ownership. So intramedia competition has been a trend of the last 5 to 10 years. And then we talk of the market dominance. Market dominance basically was characterized by the rise of regional media. Earlier there was local media and regional and national media. Then we had deregulation and privatization, globalized economies coming up. As a result, the market dominance could only be made because everybody was competing against each other. And we would all notice that these days in times of technology, newspaper readership is slowly going down. But what is it which is controlling the market dominance? It is the rise of regional media. And we would see that the regional media, regional newspapers still have a strong stakehold amongst the audiences. So in all the SEC B class towns and cities, we would see that newspapers continue to play an important role in the lives of their audiences as compared to metropolitans or English reading audiences, where they are slowly shifting over to the digital forms of newspapers. Then an interchangeable thing keeps happening. Economy is greatly affected by entertainment plus advertising plus marketing. All of it is leading to technological development. On the other hand, technological development is pushing all these three components, entertainment, advertising and marketing, to a stronger economy. So this is another factor that keeps operating, which has been in operation for years now and will continue to be as long as ICT and media continue to be as dominant and as proliferant as they are today. Now we talk about media integration. We will talk of three kinds of media integration basically. So how do media companies integrate? One is the horizontal integration, where we would see the merger of firms doing same business activity. And in the supply chain management, they could be at the same levels. So horizontally they are synergizing, horizontally they are merging their energies. So this helps them in expanding their market share, and it helps them in expanding their resources as well. And this is an attractive strategy because of dominance of economies. They are able to take greater control of the market. And it negatively affects the diversity of content, because when you hold a greater share of the market in terms of audience, in terms of numbers, obviously the content that you are pushing through is the only one which is homogenizing the people and their opinions and is reaching a large mass. So, the diversity ceases to exist. Also, it pushes smaller media outlets out of competition totally because of their inability to bleed. Now we talk of the vertical integration. This is basically done to gain ownership of content as well as distribution, like Netflix or Amazon Prime are a case in point. Then they can push any potential competitor out of the market, since they are owning two important sectors of the business. One is the content, the other is the distribution. And it also helps in reducing transaction costs for them. So it is highly beneficial to the two companies who decide to vertically integrate. Then there is a greater control over their operating environment. Because since their market share becomes stronger, they have a greater control over the market operations. Now we talk about the diagonal or lateral expansion. This happens when firms diversify into a totally new business area. So somebody who's into oil diversifies into media. What happens? The resultant is that the risk factor gets spread. If you're only owning a media concern or oil, probably the risk that is there will always be dominating your business. But here, if your media sector is not doing well enough, you can always pump in money from the oil sector. So the risk gets spread and they are more protected against any damages that happens due to movements of the market. So this is the diagonal or lateral expansion. Now we discuss the last topic, but very important, which is the ethical issues. When we talk about ethical issues, there is no transparency about media ownership and no laws to enforce that. And this is a problem because we don't know who is having how much stake in which television channel or in which newspaper. And then accordingly, because if somebody owns a certain, the majority shares, obviously that media will not speak anything against the business. So there is no transparency about media ownership and no laws also, which would enforce that the transparency be there. So that is a huge problem that media ownership faces. Then there is no transparency on ownership of content. This is dangerous, to say the least. Because when you do not even know who is it who owns the content that is being propagated amongst huge masses, you do know how potent media content is. And there's nobody today who lives without media. So ideally, you're not only, brainwashing is a strong term, let me say, trying to make a different opinion for the people, but at the same time, it is all driven by one person's business interest who is controlling the content of media. Then there is no editorial autonomy. Once upon a time in newspapers, editors were worshipped. They were knowledgeable entities, what they said mattered, and what was written in the editorial was taken to be the signature statement of the newspaper. It was very, very important. But today we have no editorial economy. The autonomy has gone into the hands of the marketing personnel. So it is more about a product which needs to be marketed. It is not about editorial autonomy. It is not about coming up with an informed, well-researched opinion, because it is going to in turn manipulate or make or break opinions of the audiences. Price wars. This is one very important thing. All that we've discussed in this session today, we've discussed about the rise of conglomerates, we've discussed about globalized economies, how people participate in media businesses, and how they affect their revenues. All this has led to fierce price wars, both intermedia as well as intramedia. So when we talk about intermedia price wars, we know that one newspaper or one TV channel which has great number of funding, which is being supported from investors outside the country or even within, is in a greater position to create publicity, offer its product in lesser price as compared to the one who is struggling. So obviously he will be or she will be in a better position to push out the competition of the market, and there will be more media monopoly. Then there are political deals to design editorial content favorably. Media is not untouched by politics. It has never been, ever. So ideally, when there are political deals, there can be a way which maybe the audiences may or may not be able to figure out very prominently, but there can be the designing of editorial content in such a way as to favor a certain political party or a political ideology. Then of course there are social implications. Social implications are all right, there's always a silver lining in the cloud, both positive and negative. When I say negative, we all know they are trying to homogenize cultures, they are trying to bring in consumerism. All these are negative effects, the social implications, negative social implications of such kind of a media scenario and such kind of media ownership. But when we look at the positive side of it, today whatever is happening can easily be recorded on your mobiles and circulated. It can be made viral through various social media platforms that we have. So, however less a government or a business sector tries, they cannot really, make a news fade away. It will circulate, it will come into picture, it will get noticed. So, ideally there are both social as well, positive as well as negative social implications. And all of these are ethical issues on which media, not only today, it has been dealing with such ethical issues in the past, and it will have to contemplate how it is going to proceed in future. So I would end my session with that. Learning excites thought. Keep thinking. Happy learning. I hope you all enjoyed this session. Thank you very much.